Hi guys, welcome to ManchTalk. I am flying solo today without my sidekick Tammy. I am Carla Garrick, of course, and I'm delighted to welcome to the studio with me today someone who I've been running with here in Ward 11, Brian Chicoine. Is that right?
Yeah, Chicoine, yes.
Chicoine.
Yeah, that's okay.
See, so you have a last name like mine, where it is troublesome for some people to pronounce.
Yes, a lot of people mispronounce it. Growing up in elementary school, I was a very shy child, and teachers used to botch it big time. Like, I've had every way to pronounce it, and finally, I think I was in 4th grade. The teacher spent about 5 minutes botching my name, went around the class and came back to me, and finally said, "Oh, wait a minute, you're related to the teacher in the class." And I'm thinking to myself, because I wasn't going to really, talk back to my teacher. I was thinking to myself, well, you know the last name is spelled the same way, so why are you messing with me? But, it's all right.
Yeah, no, I feel you because, my last name, of course, I'm from South Africa originally, so the correct pronunciation is Gerike.
Right.
Which, of course, no one can say. So people will say it's Garricky or it's Garrick or whatever. I like to think, I just say it's Garrick, so it's sort of like Garrick with the silent E. No one knows what to do with that E at the end there. So
our little ones call it the ninja letter, the E. So it's Garrick with the ninja letter.
I love that. So we just went through the primary.
Yes,
so
we did.
For folks following along at home, I'm delighted to say that I actually won my primary. It was a squeaker there for a while. It was going back and forth, which, to be honest, I found a little surprising because, my opponent did not, as far as I know, campaign at all. He certainly didn't file a financial report. He didn't put signs out. But he is a well-known older guy who's been in the establishment for a long time. So, I'm going to take the win where I can get it. It was 52-48 in the end.
It's a win.
But you, tell us about your race.
Yes, there were actually was uncontested on the Republican side. It was myself and Brittany Clear Ping on the Republican side. Our names are on the ballot, but, we weren't going to win or lose that particular election.
So it was you and Brittany are in Ward 11.
Ward 11.
And then Amanda Higgins
She's
is
10,
our
11, 12.
floterial who's in Wards 10, 11, and 12. And just for people back home, Ward 10 is the ward that Tammy Simmons, who's usually my co-host, and Dan Garthwaite are running in. That's one of my wards for the senatorial space. And then Ward 11 is where we all live, and so where we've been doing a lot of door knocking.
Right, and 12 is, I know the flotorial is Carlos, and I forget who the Ward 12...
Senator is, oh goodness,
that's Aaron, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, he's a senator, and then there are 2 Republicans running, but none of us were opposed. On the Democratic side in Ward 11, there were the 2 sitting representatives, Cornell and Griffith. And then they had 3 others as well. So they had a 5-way primary.
So there was a lot of competition and frothiness in there. That's interesting.
They definitely had a primary. And Cornell had the most votes. I came in second.
Good for you. That's
so
a nice, strong showing.
If it were the election, I would have won a seat. And then I believe it was like Brittany and Willis. So I think that was the order. So it was definitely a good victory. Momentum, being the new guy running.
Right.
And it's definitely the momentum. It was surprising because I really wasn't sure how many people would actually vote for that office because it says on the ballot vote for 2. There's only 2 there.
Right.
And
actually that's sort of a challenge just in terms of, how elections work and sort of this concept of voting down the ticket. Before I got involved, I remember, Tammy, amongst other people, in the GOP, whenever we had a meeting, you would go to the meeting and they'd be like, tell everyone to vote down the ticket. And I was like, what is it even? But then when you look at the results, and I realized, with our ticket, for example, Governor Sununu received at least 30% more votes than any of us, which means those are people who are going and they're like, oh, I know who governor is, but I don't know who any of these people are, so I'm not going to vote for them, or I'm not going to vote for them,
exactly.
Which is what that gap is.
Yes.
And so, when we say to folks back home, really, if you want to actually support us, you have to pick that oval. You have to, go down the ticket and you have to say these are the better options. And certainly with Republicans, at least you're going to know that you're probably going to keep a little more of your money, that you can make your own decisions with. And so, if that's important to you, which I wouldn't see why people wouldn't want to keep more of their money.
Right, exactly. Decide what they want to do.
They should definitely, of course, pick us. So why did you decide to run?
Well, I decided to run because I know with the response to COVID-19, New Hampshire is going to have a pretty significant shortfall, which New Hampshire usually doesn't have.
When you say shortfall, you mean financial?
Financial shortfall to the budget. We're not going to make the budget. Last I read, it could be more, it could be less, because it's all estimates right now. But the estimates are at least $350 million. So that basically means that, they put together the budget, they passed it last session, I believe, and they're going to be short $350 million for stuff that they already approved.
And so those shortfalls, just to explain for folks back to home, some of that, of course, comes from things like rooms and meals tax, right? So we've had our restaurants have been closed. There's been a lot of economic hardship that really has resulted from the government's response to COVID, right? Because I think it's very important, and people back home know this for sure, that there's a virus and it's going around, but then there is also the response to the virus, and it's very important for people to sort of understand that those two things
are different. It isn't the virus that caused it; it's the response to the virus.
Exactly.
Even now, at restaurants they say 100% capacity, which they're not really, because you still have the 6-foot rule. But nonetheless, people still are not going to the restaurants. I mean, I know a couple people that own restaurants, and they're saying people just aren't coming. And with the colder weather upon us coming, what are we going to do? We really can't eat outside in the middle of February. Right. So people aren't going to restaurants. They're not paying the rooms and meals taxes. The hotels were closed. People still are not traveling as much as they did.
Yes, tourism is definitely down.
Tourism's down. People are working from home, so they're not driving through the tolls.
Although, I will say this, that was one of those things where I was like, if they really were that concerned, should we be exchanging money? Like, wouldn't that have been the freebie to just give everyone? Is be like, let's shut down. And I do know they shut down the tolls from 9 p.m. at night, but now they're actually sending you a mail ticket that charges you $1 for the toll plus $1 for processing it in paper form. Right. So the toll has now become $2 because of the shutdown.
And I'm not sure how it has affected the lottery. I haven't really heard much about that. We have a pretty popular lottery, and now we have sports betting, and we have a sports book now.
Yeah, and actually, I was over at the Trump campaign office on Sunday to drop off lit, and I happened to run into Al Baldassaro, who of course is a sitting state rep, and he had just come from the new gambling hall that opened up where the poker room was. So I guess at least sports betting and gambling are. Still taking place.
Yeah, sports betting is a huge thing, and there used to be a sports book at Foxwoods, when it first opened. I remember the sports book there, and they closed it. I'm not sure why. And Rhode Island recently got it, but they've had some major issues with it that I've read about and heard about. And so New Hampshire is the second state in New England that has it, and one of the very few in the country. The closest before Rhode Island and New Hampshire was, I believe, New Jersey. So they're they're not as concentrated as everyone wants a
Right.
casino now, and they're going to be oversaturated, but not necessarily sports betting.
Well, but of course, if you let the market function as
Dictate.
it should,
Right.
So I know, for example, my opponent in my Senate race, of course, Lou D'Alessandro, a big gambling guy, right?
Yep.
But he only represented the interests of a certain group, right?
Right.
So when they were talking about gambling over the past decade here in New Hampshire, I mean, I think that the desire for that kind of went down once they built the big one in Massachusetts, right? There was this competition that was sort of happening between New Hampshire and Mass, and Mass passed it faster. But part of the holdup here in New Hampshire, quite rightly, I think, was the fact that they were trying to do this monopoly gambling.
Right.
So, for someone like me who's a big proponent of free markets, what you want to see is if you're going to free the market, then make it free so that everyone is competing on a level playing field.
Right.
You make it so that if there's gambling, anyone can do it, so that we can say the best people who offer the best services at the best price will succeed, right? That's the market. And it sounds simplistic. I explain these things because I literally think that there is an entire generation of people who don't understand how markets work anymore.
And it is simple.
Right?
Yeah.
But then someone like Lou was like, we should only have 2 licenses. Let's control it. And, I'm not a cronyist, but why don't we just give that license only to my friends?
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, well, that's not how the government's supposed to work. It's not supposed to be for special interests that take care of the senator's friends.
Right.
It's supposed to be, let's take care of everyone and create equal opportunity for everyone by making it a level playing field.
Exactly. We're not, and people talk about level playing field, but not when it comes to that.
Yeah, or really anything anymore, right? Because in some ways, I think government has been co-opted by special interests because it's become this body that is divvying out money to different groups of people, right? Taking from one group and giving it to another, which of course is why everyone is pretty upset these days.
Exactly.
Right?
We're supposed to be a true free market economy, and we're not really. A lot of it is controlled by the government. They'll say you're allowed to have casinos, you're allowed to have marijuana, you're allowed to do this, but we're going to control it with only so many people can have this license, and then we're going to tax and regulate it like to no end, and it doesn't work that way. It stifles the economy and causes people to go back to the black market or however they were getting their services prior.
Right, and of course with something like the black market, even in, I differ from a lot of my Republican brethren on my stance on cannabis, right? So I've always been a proponent of both medical marijuana and also just recreational.
Right.
And my thinking for that is simply, if you make things illegal, bad things follow.
Right.
Because when you make something illegal, you are saying that there is no rule of law and we can't provide the protections of contract law, of being able to go to the courts, of being able to call the police if you need help, any of those things, right? That's basically what the black market is. So if you force people to operate in the black market, terrible things happen.
Exactly.
I mean, take something like our opioid crisis, right? Where it's like people go, why did it get so bad? And it's like, well, maybe part of the problem was that our government lied to us about how bad marijuana was, right? Like they were like, this is your brain on drugs, and you're gonna,
the egg.
Like all that stuff where you're like, well, that's not what cannabis is, and we know that now because we actually approved it as a medicine. I mean, that took 70 years, but okay, finally got that done, right? But I tend to think, well, maybe to some extent, if you lie to people about things here, but you're actually telling the truth here, because opioids are destructive and dangerous and addictive and all of those things. So I tend to think maybe a lot of people were like, well, they told us weed was bad, but it wasn't, so I'm going to try heroin, and then, because we didn't tell people the truth from the start.
And another thing is that if you tell someone they can't do it, they might do it. Just because that's human nature. We tend to like to do things that we're told not to do. So, at least in my family, that's the way it is. You tell me no, it's I'm going to try it, and we're realizing that, especially with our youngest, if we say no, without an explanation, it's not going to work.
Right. So tell me a little bit about like how you grew up in Manchester, right? You have a family. Just a little bit about your background.
I was born in Nashua and lived in Raymond, New Hampshire until about the age of 8, and I moved to Manchester, which was 1980 when Manchester was still a pretty small city. It's still a relatively small city, but it was a lot smaller than it is now. And grew up here. I moved to Rhode Island to finish college. Met my wife actually the first day in Rhode Island.
Nice.
And lived there total. There were two separate times, but a total of 15 years. And we came back to New Hampshire a little over 3 years ago. I am married. I've been married for 19 years, and I might have gotten that wrong. I usually know that. But,
we'll cut that part out.
Yeah, all right. And we have 2 boys, almost 16 and 11. We're going to be taking the 16-year-old out driving. Yeah, we live on the west side. Pretty much have always lived on the west side when we were here. I went to Goslar, Parkside, and West. Did 1 year at Southside. Decided that I really liked the West Side better, so wrestled and joined ROTC so I could go to West.
Nice.
Because it was very districts were a lot different when I went, but they were very district oriented, and I was supposed to go to Memorial, but.
So since you talked about schools there a little bit, maybe we can talk about sort of maybe some thoughts that you have. Obviously, we're in sort of a complex situation with regard to education at the moment, right? So there's, would you say just on a simple yes or no, are you for school choice?
I am heavily in favor of educational choice. I believe it depends on the person. We homeschool. We have friends that send their children to private school. We have friends that homeschool. We have friends that send their children to public school, which right now they're at home. But, our thought and my thought is whatever works for the family. I have no problem with teachers. I support teachers. They have very difficult jobs. I have friends and family, including my sister-in-law, who are teachers in the public school system. However, they're really not given resources they need. Like my wife and I have 2. So, I mean, it's a 1-on-1 ratio.
Right.
Whereas if they were in a public school setting, I don't really know what the ratio would be because it kind of shifts. And one example is my sister teaches, and she's always been a math and science teacher for well over 20 years. And this year, because of what's going on, she now has to teach social studies.
Oh, wow.
And she can do it. She's very smart, but that's not her wheelhouse, so to speak. So I have more problems with the system than I do with teachers themselves because they have a very difficult job.
Right, and I think that is such an important point to make, because I'm obviously very critical about, the government, right? Because I like small government.
Right.
But it's important for people to understand it's not personal, right? It's about when we create institutions and outcomes.
Right.
And I know, like on election day, I had I was up at Ward 4, and we were poll standing, and we were kind of talking, the Democrats. I was chatting to Nicole, and one of the conversations that we had, because I was sort of trying to make a case for school choice, and she was not having much of it.
Right.
And I asked her, just straight up, but can you help me understand, like, is it about the institution or is it about kids learning stuff? Right. And so she had to concede, of course, that really what we want is, it's not the role of government to prop up a building.
Right.
Or, 3,000 teachers on the payroll, right? It's the job, the reason these things exist is so that we can be teaching children to read and write, and according to the New Hampshire Constitution, so that they can cherish education, so that they could be good citizens,
right.
So that, we don't have a bankrupt state, or lots of crime or any of those things, right? Like we make good people so that good people do good things, right? But somewhere along the line, we've lost that motivation, maybe.
Right.
So do you have any thoughts on sort of allowing the money to follow the children? Is that something you'd be interested in seeing?
I'd like to explore that. I know that Governor Sununu and the Commissioner of Education have both talked about that. A lot of pushback on that, of course, and I believe 2 or 3 times the previous legislative session, a significant grant which would have went to charter schools was voted down.
Right, from the Executive Council twice, $46 million. Right. There is no justification for them to be doing that at all.
The only justification I heard is that we need to concentrate on public schools. It's like, but we have been, and it's not working. And as I said, it's not the teachers. They're the front lines. They're the ones that people see. And like you had mentioned earlier, we really need to separate that because of the fact that it's not the teachers, it's the system.
And it's not just like the system, but it's also the bureaucrats. Yeah. I mean, if you look at the delta between, what teachers are getting paid and what the red tape administrative level,
right?
Up here they're making like hundreds of thousands of dollars. Right. It's a shocking amount. You will be surprised if you go look, And so there's even that idea of, well, could we take something here and help here, right? But something that struck me recently, I don't know if you read about this, but I think it was Joe Kelly Lavasser, who of course is a bit of a divisive figure, right? But he had posted something on social media talking about encouraging parents to record sessions between the teacher and their child for anyone who's doing remote learning, right? And there was this brouhaha that kicked up. I'm not sure if it came from the unions or where people were saying, you can't do that because New Hampshire is a dual consent state, so you're not allowed to record the teacher teaching. But of course, what he wanted to do is he just wanted to get some evidence because apparently a lot of the teachers aren't showing up or they're not really actually
some accountability
teaching, right? So as someone who's a huge proponent of transparency and accountability, big fan, of open, accessible, responsive.
I am as well. It's
government.
All about, it's all about that.
Because that's how if we're, if things are working right, our government is working for us.
Right.
And so we have to know what they're doing so that we can keep them accountable, right?
Exactly.
So I found that, curious because that seems a little suspicious, but there is a segue here. Another transparency issue, of course, that is like hot in New Hampshire is the Lori's List, right? So for folks back home, you have been listening to me talk about this for several years now. Just a quick wrap up again, it's the Lori's List, which is now known as the Exculpatory Evidence Schedule, is a secret list of bad New Hampshire cops that is not currently available for the public to view. What happened was several years ago, people caught wind, mostly the newspapers, of this list, right? So the union leader and 4 other newspapers in New Hampshire and the ACLU filed a right to know request and said, oh, what? There's this list of hundreds of law enforcement officers with sustained findings of misconduct. Maybe we should know who they are, right? So the AG's office, in all their wisdom, sent the newspapers the list with all of the names redacted. Now, I don't know what's more Orwellian and sort of 1984 than that, but that I found quite horrifying. That the government's response to here is a list of, cops that have been found guilty, not guilty, that have been found by their own police chief to have sustained findings of misconduct for things like testifying, so lying in court, perjury, that is a criminal offense when you and I do it. Excessive force, also criminal when you and I do it. Lying, stealing, cheating, all of that, right? So there's a secret list. So of course the union leader and the other newspapers were like, you know what, maybe we should
have that.
Maybe we should have that. So they sued. And in April last year, so more than a year and a half ago, Judge Temple in the court, the Superior Court came out quite rightly, and he said, yes, there's a public interest in us knowing who are troublesome, problematic police officers and law enforcement and state troopers. That list should be made available.
Right.
I filed a 91A between the day that he did the order and 2 days later when the AG's office filed their appeal. So people need to understand the Attorney General of New Hampshire filed an appeal to keep that list secret.
Right.
So the hearing, so that appeal is happening tomorrow.
Right.
It is available for folks to log on 9:30 tomorrow morning. There'll be a live stream. People can listen to the arguments as to why 264 police officers' names for sustained findings of misconduct should be kept secret. I wanted to make sure people heard about that. I know you're a big accountability proponent as well. We're going to run out of time in the next few minutes. So I want to make sure, if there's anything you would like folks back home to know about, where they can reach you, whether yard signs, all of that good stuff.
They can reach me. My email is Brian, BRIAN, 4, the number 4, NH, at outlook.com. They could reach me via my website, which is www.brian4, the number again, nh.com. Or they can message me. My Facebook page, surprisingly, is Brian4NH. And they can go ahead and message me if they have any questions, issues we spoke about today that they're not 100% clear about. My number one reason for running is basically I don't want to see the economic burden of our recovery put on the backs of individuals, families, or small businesses, which tends to be the first thing that they do is let's just tax them or regulate or something, or raise a fee. And so that's basically how you go ahead and reach me. And if you have any questions or want to sign or anything, just shout out.
Wonderful. So, Brian, thank you so much for joining us. Folks back home, thank you for tuning in again. Of course, we know by now, buy my book, The Ecstatic Pessimist. I am going to tell everyone, you should buy my book and read it because then you'll really, really, really want to vote for me. I, of course, am Carla Garrick. You can reach me at carlagarrick.com. 865-7140. Feel free to call me if you have any questions. Thank you for joining us. We will be back again next week, hopefully with Tammy, with her eye back to normal. And in the meanwhile, I hope you guys have a wonderful week. Get out there, enjoy the beautiful fall weather, and we'll see you again next week. Peace out.